Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, why the controversy over President Obama's moderate nominee for the Supreme Court? We chat with law professor and blogger Darren Hutchinson. The president has stepped in to revive the nation's largest estuary, the Chesapeake Bay. But will it matter? We talk with Fred Tutman, Patuxent Riverkeeper. Also, the story of a parcel of land in Georgia, as told by choreographer and performer Cassie Meador. We've got a Grant McLeman verse set to photos, poetry by Bernadette Geyer and Joshua Weiner, and music with five-time 2008 Whammy winner Billy Coulter on the Coffee House. Welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. If a wealthy white male graduated first in his class at Princeton, was editor of the esteemed Yale Law Journal, went on to serve as a state prosecutor and then as a corporate attorney, was appointed a federal court judge by a Republican president, and was subsequently named to the Federal Appeals Court in New York, if that man with 17 years' experience as a federal jurist expressed empathy for America's hard-pressed business owners and risk-taking investors, do you think the Foxist echo chamber would be trashing his qualifications to serve as an associate justice on the highest court of the land? Well, American University law professor Darren Hutchinson isn't so sure. Professor Hutchinson has taught and written widely on constitutional law, critical race theory, and equal protection. But maybe he's biased, after all, like Judge Sonia Sotomayor. He's a graduate of Yale Law School, and he's not a white male. Welcome, Darren, to the Coffee House.
Thank you.
There's beginning to be a kind of something of a split in the Republican ranks over Judge Sotomayor's nomination to the Supreme Court. On the one hand, you have the would-be presidential candidates, Mitt Romney, Mike Huckabee, Newt Gingrich, aligned with the right-wing talk show celebrities, Hannity and folks. On the other hand, you have the Senate Republicans and the National Republican Party taking a far more circumspect view of this nomination. Explain what's going on here.
All right, well, I have noticed that split as well. I think you have a few factors influencing that. First, you have to remember that some of the senators are from states with a large number of either Latino voters. So Kay Bailey Hutchinson was one of the persons who came out saying we need to be a little bit more dignified in our opposition to Sotomayor. And then others are from more moderate states, and you can certainly expect them to have a much more circumscribed approach to this. Whereas presidential candidates, they need to rally the base, and this is certainly a vehicle for them to do that, to sort of create this scary, very progressive liberal judge so that they can then argue against and oppose.
There seem to be three lines of attack against Judge Sotomayor's nomination. First, that she's a liberal activist in that she believes that appellate judges engage in policy making. Second, that she believes, like President Obama, that a judge should show empathy in reaching decisions rather than making it strictly on the law. And third, that she's a racist. Now let's go through each of these one by one. First, on the question of her being a liberal activist who believes that she should be making policy from the bench.
Right. Well, there's so many things that are wrong with that line of conversation. First is the policy argument. So there's a clip from a speech that she delivered at Duke Law School where she said the courts of appeals are where policy is made. And that went around for about a week without any context provided. Then you get websites like Media Matters providing the entire transcript basically what she was doing was comparing the district courts with the courts of appeals, saying that essentially the courts of appeals have more far-reaching implication for constitutional law and statutory interpretation because the Supreme Court only taking 1% of the cases appealed to it, the Court of Appeals have a very strong voice in terms of interpreting the Constitution. So that was what this policy discussion was about.
And that issue kind of faded, and we then became introduced to the question of empathy.
Right.
And this was a takeoff on President Obama saying that he wanted a judge who would be empathetic.
Exactly.
And could put themselves in the shoes of the potential victims or how this would have a real-world impact. What is wrong with empathy in a judge?
Right. I don't think there's anything wrong with empathy in a judge. In fact, judges frequently show empathy, conservatives and liberals alike. So I think if the opponents to Sotomayor were honest, they would probably say there's nothing wrong with empathy as such, but they aren't that happy with the people she might empathize with. So, for example, will she empathize with female victims of discrimination, or will she empathize with corporations who are engaging in employment discrimination? Will she empathize with poor communities who are victims of environmental racism, or will she empathize with the company? So I think it's a question of values rather than a question of judicial function. So judges often show empathy. That doesn't mean they aren't interpreting the law as well, but their background, their experiences, and their ideologies lead them to certain places. And I think underlying all of the rhetoric is a simple dispute over ideology.
The issue of racism. Rush Limbaugh most notably described her nomination as equivalent to that of David Duke, the Ku Klux Klan leader. And there seem to be two bases upon which the allegations of racism are made. One is from a speech that she made in which she said that she would hope that a wise Latino woman might make better judgments in a case than a white male based upon the richness of her experience, that different experience that she has.
All right, that's another one that's like the policy quote. So the full speech as presented in the New York Times was 5 web screens, but the opponents have been focusing on 1 or 2 sentences in the entire speech to make it look like she, A, doesn't believe that judges can remove themselves from their experiences, even though there's language in there where she talks about doing that. And then the last line almost was this discussion about a Latino with certain experiences being able to make better decisions. But the preceding discussion was her going back and forth with an argument that another judge made about white men being on the court when the civil rights movement happened and all these cases going forward, and white men being on the court during the women's movement and still making the right decisions. And Sotomayor had 2 responses to that. First was that the lawyers who created the litigation strategy in both of those movements were women and people of color, so diversity mattered. And then the second thing she said was, all right, I agree that they made great decisions, but imagine a woman who, from that background, who's lived those experiences, sitting in judgment in those particular cases. I suspect that I might be able to make even better decisions. So without hearing the lead up, it sounds like she's saying something totally different. But when you put it in context, it's innocuous.
But there is a court decision that gets thrown at her as well. When she sat on the Second Circuit, she voted to affirm a decision, a district court decision, upholding New Haven, Connecticut's throwing out a promotion exam for firefighters because it resulted in white firefighters being promoted and very few minorities.
Right. Well, ruling on that case in favor of the city doesn't make her racist. It means that she believes that the city had a good reason for throwing out the test. Basically, this was a question of disparate impact. So the city had this test to determine who could get promoted in the fire department. It turns out that only one Latino and no blacks would have gotten a promotion. Under Title VII, which is a federal employment discrimination law, disparate impact is enough to prove discrimination. So the city said it scrapped the test in order to get one that was less discriminatory to avoid litigation and also to enhance diversity in terms of who gets promotion. And the Supreme Court has actually said that you can be conscious of race, but use race-neutral ways like a new test to enhance diversity. Justice Kennedy, in a very important ruling 2 years ago, said exactly that. That if you not use affirmative action, but come up with a new test that's less discriminatory, that's a good way of creating diversity.
Now, you've been reviewing her Court of Appeals decisions.
Yes.
Including decisions regarding race.
Yes.
What have you found?
I have found that she is a mainstream liberal, and some people might say that she's too careful. Like some of the left might believe she's too careful in some of those cases, but they don't show a judge who's one-sided at all. In fact,
Do minorities ever lose in her court?
Minorities lose. There's a very sympathetic plaintiff in a case who was a woman of color who was disabled, was injured on the job, and she ruled against her in terms of a disability claim. There's another case, this is a very important one in terms of her being impartial. She was on a 3-judge panel, as the appeals courts are, and the plaintiff was a white male who works for the New York Police Department, was fired for circulating racist literature, and the panel upheld the decision to terminate him. She dissented. She dissented, saying that that was a free speech issue. That racist speech, it may be disagreeable, but it is nevertheless political speech.
And I gather that the speech that he was making wasn't saying that a wise Latino woman might make a better decision on the Supreme Court than a white male.
No, it was threatening speech to persons of color. And she upheld his right, saying it was political speech, which I actually agree with that, but without going into that doctrine, definitely shows that, you know, if she were willing to go, if she wanted to go after white litigants, she could have done it there, but she made actually a decision that goes counter to the discourse that
let me
people have been
suggest
inventing.
something to you, that the vehemence with which people like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck are attacking her reflects a sense of, okay, now it's our turn. We're going to get our pound of flesh for all of the liberal attacks against Hainsworth and Carswell and Bork and Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, down the line.
I think there may be some of that, but remember, there have been Democratic appointees since the Bork era. So Clinton got to appoint a few, and they didn't become this heated. So I do agree that the appointments process is very political, so you're going to have those sides come up generally. But there's something about this one, I think, that pulls out some even deeper animosity around issues of class, race, and gender that I think are framing some of the discourse. Not by all opponents, but certainly by a large chunk of the very public ones.
All right, we're about out of time. What do you predict will happen with her nomination?
I predict she will be confirmed. At some point, people are going to have to discuss her body of case law, and they will not find anything that matches the rhetoric against her. It may be a battle, a lot of safe conservative senators voting against her, but at the end of the day, I think she'll get through.
Well, many thanks to Professor Darren Hutchinson for your insights into the legal and political issues at play in the nomination of Judge Sonia Sotomayor to the U.S. Supreme Court. You can learn more at his blog, dissentingjustice.blog.spot.com. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
I waited for the doctor in the small room, that one with the table with the ancient iron stirrups, cold metal to hold fast the feet of women who have discovered how to force a camel through the needle's eye. The veneer on the wooden base chips away, varnish peeling to expose the table's plain, rough surface, its origin as naked as my own. 2 doors open into the table's belly, where instruments, shiny and sterile, await their calling. A thin sheet of waxy paper stretches lightly across the cracked brown leather of the tabletop, hiding stains, protecting me and those to come from an accidental reminder of our mother's labors. I was born on that surface. You were born there too. We left our marks to mingle, changing the facade of that leather altar, debasing the purity of the wood with our birth blood and placenta. One day our children will read those stains and see their common beginnings. We all leave our marks on that table, ones that can never fade nor be erased.
Trained in the mind to think only the purest thoughts, I descend to the part they call downtown, past the fast food temples that become just hamburger joints, the party shops that become liquor stores with peeling paint and huge signs, past the gas stations that even in a country made for cars become almost vacant lots, past the paraphernalia of the poor, until, thinking less than pure thoughts, I arrive on sidewalks where an unknown hand has thrown people like dice on the blue bays of a summer's evening. Watch out for Snake Eyes. He darts through pockets like ideas darts through the minds of the restless, and may steal your dreams before you're able to buy them. I cross the street, avoiding the taxis carrying the messages of the night, carry my hopes in front in a brown paper bag made for the mind, a mind that is a busy wishbone. I come up to the door, thinking impure thoughts, and knock 3 times.
Welcome to 21st Century Life here at the Coffee House. What does it take to save the Chesapeake Bay from ecological ruin? As crab and oyster numbers plummet and the bay becomes a virtual dead zone each summer, Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. recently admitted that their 25-year plan to restore the nation's largest estuary was in fact failing. Solution? President Barack Obama surprised many Bay cleanup advocates with an executive order that commits the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to an unprecedented leadership role and creates a yearly public test of progress. But will this actually save the Bay? Here to discuss this issue is Fred Tutman, Chief Executive Officer of the Patuxent Riverkeeper, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Fred, welcome to the Coffee House.
Thanks.
So, briefly, tell us what is killing the Chesapeake Bay. Why is it dying environmentally? What's the problem?
Mike, the bay is being savaged by all sorts of inputs, wastewater plants, nutrient sources from urban development, pollutant runoff from all kinds of sources, direct discharges, frankly, from polluting industries, all kinds of stuff. And oddly, there's this fog surrounding it where folks think that picking up beer cans and other stuff is somehow going to clean any of that up. So part of what's killing the bay is, I think, public ignorance or apathy about what the true underlying causes and sources of these problems are.
But if you talk to the politicians, they'll tell you they're not, apathetic. I mean, since the 1960s and 70s, there have been calls to save the bay, and the politicians have had all these plans and deadlines. There was a deadline for 2000, the year 2000, to clean up, and 2010, and still the bay continues to wither and lots of problems. What has been the political problem? Why haven't the politicians followed through?
Well, politicians do what is expedient more often than not, and that's not to say there aren't really good folks of good intention who really hope to get something done, But the truth is that the things that are savaging the Bay are institutionalized, they're profit-based interests, and it would be suicide, I think, for many politicians to take these interests on.
These include developers, farmers. I mean, it's us, basically. It's
Sure.
a modern American society.
As much money as we're trying to spend to clean this mess up, there's even more money being spent to wreck it in the first place. And while we can find all kinds of money to build huge highways and bridges and other kinds of stuff, it's rough to find $1.98 to even try and attempt restoration.
But you said that for many politicians, this would be sort of political suicide to take on these strong interests. But then May 12th, 2009, politician Barack Obama comes along, surprises many people. Not everyone knew it was coming, not even the governors of some of the states closest to the Chesapeake Bay. And Obama says, I'm gonna bring some more clout to this fight. What did he say with his executive order?
What he said is we're going to change the culture, or institutional culture, surrounding this Bay cleanup. And the EPA, rather than being an outpost agency, the Bay program in Annapolis, that's observing and monitoring and kind of kibitzing, is now going to assume, or basically the overarching agency that runs that program, the EPA, is now going to assume the role of a leader. They're actually going to set benchmarks. They're going to convene all of the federal agencies, or at least cabinet agencies, that have some piece of the puzzle. They're going to come up with better and more objective benchmarks in order to measure how we're really doing, because in all honesty, people are really confused about this. It's like the stock market. They wait for a report card to come out every year, and it's kind of like a game. Will it be up? Will it be down? As though somehow these things are kind of up to the winds or up to sunspots or something like that. The truth is, after all of this enterprise for all these years to clean this Bay up, it ought to be a national embarrassment that it's just sinking lower and lower. So there are two possibilities here, right? One is this considerable hypocrisy socially about what we're really doing to clean the Bay up. What we're really doing is spending a lot of money on stuff that doesn't have a core impact on water quality. I guess another possibility is we're working on all the wrong stuff, or some of the wrong stuff. So this executive order charts a course, a fairly daring course, because there is an enculturation around these issues. People actually have gotten rather comfortable with the idea that we have to fund this stuff and we're going to do buffer restoration, and like I mentioned, trash cleanups and all this stuff. These don't seem to be having the desired effect, but we're also not harvesting money from the folks that have wrecked it. We're also not funding these with recovery of money from those who are the institutional violators.
Now, going back to the politics, you've said, I mean, one of the things the Obama executive order does is it sort of tightens these timelines and these lookbacks. The politicians, the state politicians, in the last few years have set 10-year deadlines. So we're going to do better every 10 years. And Obama takes a different course on that.
Well, he does. He's ramping up the accountability. Accountability is a word that appears throughout the order. Incidentally, performance-based is also in there quite a bit. The idea is that we're going to try and find out what's really working as opposed to what's just kind of turning the motor. I mean, let's be clear, the federal government does not, in the normal course of affairs, direct the states in how they're pursuing their cleanup efforts. The potential of this, I guess, is twofold. One, it brings increased energy and synergy and coordination to the federal role in cleaning up some of these problems and approaching some of these long-held issues, including ensuring that the federal agencies themselves, DOD agencies, Department of Interior and others, are using practices that are going to minimize the footprint of the federal government on them. That's one side of it. The other side is, too, it offers an opportunity, an oversight board. It's called the Federal Leadership Committee, I believe, that will actually shed more light on what the states actually are doing.
So that's the head of the EPA, the Department of Agriculture.
Homeland
These are all
Security.
Homeland Security. All these federal agencies will appoint a high-level person, and a committee that will oversee and coordinate with the states.
Yeah, and I guess the question that comes up, and in the environmental community, people say, well, is this just talk? Is this just more puffery? Is an executive order worth the paper that it's printed on, or the cyber text that's on your screen? And I think the thing that's interesting here is this is actually a different brand of rhetoric. Okay, this is actually not ratifying the status quo. It's not saying, wow, the Fed's going to come and help you guys do what you're already doing. It acknowledges openly, whatever the world you guys are doing, it ain't working. We need to take a different look at these problems, find a different way of benchmarking them, use new, and I think the term that's used is the next generation of strategies in order to approach these problems. It offers the potential, too, because remember, there are lots of vectors that the states have in terms of interacting with the Fed. It offers the opportunity that's more synchronicity, more coordination on many different fronts. I mean, ag, for example,
But I mean,
is one of those agencies.
if you look at these state governors, they'll say the same words: coordination, interaction, cooperation, same sort of buzzwords. I guess the question is, where's the stick? I mean, you got a 64,000 square mile watershed. This is a really big place, and it's doing really poorly. Obama steps in. He's got an executive order. Where's the stick? What happens if the states don't get it together and the Bay doesn't get better? Who pays?
Well, we'll see what the stick is. I mean, the potential that's there and the promise that's being made, or the commitment that's being made in this executive order, is that the stick is the full weight of the cabinet agencies that the president controls will now be used to come up with a directed strategy that has a central leadership core that is directed towards using performance-based solutions in order to make something happen that hasn't happened before. A central strategy. Because remember, we have all of these jurisdictions that have signed this Chesapeake Bay Agreement. Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania's in there as well. And they're not really working together. In fact, sometimes they're even creating lawmaking that's in conflict with one another. So it provides some central mechanism to oversee what these folks are doing, see what works, interact with these places in order to get more bang for the buck, so to speak. And also, it doesn't disable the existing Chesapeake Bay program, the EPA interest that's already operative in the area. It actually gives it a new lease on life in a way. It actually says, hey, we're actually going to have you guys working on stuff in a whole different context. You're not just advisors, you're part of the leadership cadre that's directing the strategies that are favored, that are supposed to be used.
Now, in many environmental battles, and including more recently the battle to save the Chesapeake Bay, the courts have become important. Now, political bodies can say anything, general assemblies can pass laws, but they don't always follow through, and it requires that advocates then go to court to hold people accountable. You've said that you believe that this Obama executive order might actually create a legal court atmosphere very different than the Bush administration that could actually help with the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay. What do you mean by that?
Well, interesting, because it implies, the executive order implies, that the regulatory regime of the federal government is basically on the side of the advocates for these water quality resources.
Big change from the Bush
Huge
administration.
change, much friendlier environment to those of us who care about actual results, real outcomes, seeing existing laws enforced. The executive order is very specific about ramped up and improved enforcement and utilization of the Clean Water Act, for example, which is barely referenced a lot of the time in at least state action. The states really do, like I said, what's expedient, what's in the budget, what they can do. They're trying to balance the equities, and it's really hard when you're balancing something if there's a gold standard. The gold standard here being clean air, clean water, open space, all of these grand environmental things that we've come to expect that we're not getting. Those are gold standard. What you're talking about balancing in those realms, there's no such thing, right? Balancing would mean that you have a little bit of everybody's posture in there. So it's either clean or it isn't, is my point.
And you believe this executive order will help us see what is clean and what isn't clean. And I wanted to ask you, the executive order that Barack Obama issued on May 12th also talks about climate change adaptation. It says that climate change is coming. I mean, it declares it. The climate is changing. It's going to affect the Chesapeake Bay. What does Obama want us to do in terms of this word adaptation?
Well, it intends to wrap the acknowledgement of climate change as a real factor, not voodoo, not something that's kind of fringe thought. It's a complete reversal from the prior administration's view, which either didn't mention it at all or tended to try and argue with the science. It actually suggests, the executive order suggests, that we're now going to wrap in the acknowledgement of climate change factors into the decision making, into the planning, into the framework for determining what the environmental future will be for our
And how might that be
Bay.
a factor?
Well, I think it's pretty foreseeable in a lot of this. In fact, Maryland has already acknowledged that there are waterfront areas that are likely to be inundated in the foreseeable future due to increased sea rise, more severe storm events. I guess
that could affect where you plant trees and where you restore areas, in other words?
Oh, certainly, particularly if you're talking about a real estate market that is very fond of waterfront property. Inundated property is probably not a very commercially viable proposition. It certainly hasn't been in some of those areas that have already been inundated. I mean, Katrina, I think showed us that. But the truth is, we haven't stopped doing that stuff. We're still putting in places houses and shopping centers and other developments in floodplains, in swamps or wetlands, in ravines, in sensitive areas. We haven't gotten the message that not only is this bad for public health and safety, it's bad for our ecosystem. It's actually disrupting, it's disturbing the most sensitive lands in our midst.
Now, Fred Tutman, you grew up on the Patuxent River, a tidal river of the Chesapeake Bay. You've been an advocate for the Bay for a long time. I sense that you're optimistic. It's hard to find a lot of optimism recently on Chesapeake Bay restoration because the news hasn't been great. You believe this is going to make a difference, Barack Obama's executive order?
I am hopeful that it will make a difference. I mean, I'm a realist. I've been around long enough. I'm old enough to know that I've been disappointed more than once. What I'm hearing is someone speaking truth. We're not speaking about truth to power. We're hearing power speak some truth. And that's very exciting because it's a truth that I firmly believe is genuine. And I think it's well-intentioned. And it sets the groundwork for the work that those of us who are advocates in water quality areas, I think our work will find a friendly forum.
Now you've said that, and we only have a minute left, but you've said that this executive order actually came as a surprise to many people. Some of the state governors didn't see it coming.
I don't think,
or at least as quickly.
My theory is they didn't, first of all, haven't read it yet because it's more the fog. Oh, well, the Fed's going to bring us lots of money. Well, the order doesn't say that, actually. It says more oversight. It doesn't say more money. I don't know that the state governors were expecting this. I think they were expecting some announcement, but I don't think they knew what was in it. I think they expected something that was kind of a platitude. If you listen to what they're saying at the state level, I think Maryland's governor said, oh, they'll be bringing lots of dough. I'm thinking, well, where'd you find that? It's not in the order. So I think it'll be a while. I think once they realize that it comes with oversight, I don't think people will be nearly as thrilled. I don't think they like federal oversight in any other area that I can think of. I think that's not something that's really welcome to the table.
Well, a big thanks to Fred Tutman. Will Barack Obama be remembered as the U.S. president who finally helped rescue the Chesapeake Bay? Time will tell. But time itself, it's clear, is running out on this American treasure. I'm Mike Tidwell, and this has been 21st Century Life.
Cricket says, "You know cricket by my rubbing, and cricket knows you by a like tune. Vain lovers, playing games of sweet moan to seal the hour. Watch cricket leap across your ugly tile floor and play to your boot as it misses once again. I'm cricket, blacker than coffee and tobacco juice. My song more bitter, more buzz. If you'd only quit your typing and shut up a minute." Cricket says, "Your lips confuse the issue. Cricket's long antenna, pick it all up. Cricket knows where cricket is. Cricket burrows with forelegs, choose your paper. Cricket says, stop straining for effect. Cricket loves a napper in the grass. Cricket is never wretched. In a room of smoke, cricket can breathe. Cricket sings outside your sealed room of stone.
Let the white skirt ride your bare feet. Stir up the dirt, hear me through your soles. Open palm against goat hide, bending into barril and bells. Qua calling, so come, hands unchained, stretch. I move you slowly when I want to, and when I choose to, I make you hurricane, wind. Baila, mi negra. Baila bomba.
Welcome to In Step at the Coffee House. How do you tell the story of a plot of land that changes from a farm to a strip mall to a supermarket, and then into a place of worship? Cassie Meador, a native of Augusta, Georgia, tells the story through dance, video, and shifting installations. A choreographer and performer and a member of the Liz Lerman Dance Exchange since 2002, Meador was awarded a Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts grant for her creation, Drift, which premiered last September at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Cassie, to the Coffee House.
Thanks.
Tell me, how did you come about creating Drift?
Well, the project first started to develop on these visits to my hometown of Augusta, Georgia. And I started to notice that the landscape was really shifting. And as one sort of strip mall or fast food restaurant got torn down, well, they were building the same one just a little bit down the road, only bigger. And these buildings were just sort of, bouncing down the road. And this got me thinking, one, about the incredible amount of resources that are going into to continue building these things, but also just starting to think about what are all the things that take place on a piece of land over time. And could I actually, through the process of making a dance, track what happens on a piece of land?
And how long was Drift in the making? When did you begin to work on it, start conceiving it, and how long from conception to fruition?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably been about 10 years that I've been having sort of this idea in my mind, but it wasn't until the commission from the Kennedy Center that it really made it possible. And the initial interest actually came because of the piece of land that I chose, which went from sort of this wilderness to then a farmland, to then the Piggly Wiggly supermarket, which was in the strip mall, which is where I grew up getting my groceries at. And then recently it's become a church. The church has actually moved into the strip mall, and the automatic doors are the entrance to the sanctuary. And I think some people might say, well, why would you choose to tell this story through a dance? And actually, I couldn't stay in the studio with the dancers to make this dance. We really had to leave the studio and come into contact with many other people. And this brought us actually to the community of Augusta, Georgia, where we worked with the Historic Society in Augusta. We talked to a geologist, a local ecologist, to local farmers, and those interviews actually make their way into the performance, and that's how the community travels with the piece as we continue to perform it.
And you did this in the context of the Liz Lerman Dance Exchange, and this is kind of characteristic of a dance exchange style of performance in which you do a lot of research, and there's a kind of social theme. There's also usually or often intergenerational element to the performers in the dance as well. And we have a couple clips from this performance, including one of a rather elderly, aging couple who are on the farm, seated at the meal table. Let's take a look.
Okay.
I would challenge anybody to sit down at a meal one day and to take one component of that meal, whether it's the salad, the milk, the bread, whatever component you're eating, and sit down and think about what it costs nature to have that bread. If you take bread, bread's made from grain. Grain comes from a field. Forests must be cleared to have a field. Then you have to have the equipment to plant it with. You have to have the seed. What would it take to get the seed? What about the fertilizer? What about all the other petroleum products? And you break down every one of those components to make a flow chart, and you realize that it's like one point in a spider web and all the pieces that go out from it.
What's the significance of the woman stirring the cup, kind of losing control, and then looking skyward, reaching skyward? Tell me about that.
I think this idea of the sort of losing control of things came out of looking at sort of the drastic changes that our hands, human hands, are making to the land, and also this idea of how do we look at the evidence of what we're leaving behind. And Martha got really interested in this idea, or the question of looking back.
Martha is the performer.
Yes, Martha Whitman's the performer, and Thomas Dwyer, two incredible dancers that I get to work with. But Martha got really interested in this question of looking back. And so she started to play with actually how a table gets set, but also then how a table gets unset. So a reversal of bringing the cup to the table and beginning to play with that. The sort of broken movement actually comes from some of the research and language that we got from speaking to geologists, and how land actually forms, and how rocks form, and how that disintegrates, and the shifting in the land. So we used a lot of that language about collision and how land drifts, to then impact the movement. So you might take just a simple everyday gesture of stirring the cup, but then what happens when you apply this other idea to that.
You talked a little bit about the research process you go through in creating a dance. Is it like writing a script for a play, a stage play, or is it, tell me what the process is.
Well, I'm not a writer, so I don't know what that's like, but I can say that it's very collaborative in the studio. I'm coming in with questions and ideas, and with research from our interactions in the community, but then really it's with a team of incredible artists at the Dance Exchange that they're responding to these questions through movement. Sometimes I am generating movement as the choreographer, and also working with an incredible set of designers that really have influence in how the piece gets structured. If you see, as we look at how the land changes, actually the set makes several transformations within the piece, and that really also influenced sort of how we structured the piece, and even some of our movement choices, because we had this incredible set to work with where in one scene it's a table, but in another scene actually the table transforms and becomes the farmhouse. These sort of Gothic arches that video is projected on, and in one scene it's the farm landscape, but in another scene they rotate around to actually become the aisles of the Piggly Wiggly supermarket filled with cereal boxes.
There's a lot of change emotionally as well that's reflected in the dance. So we had this kind of tragic scene of people losing the land or having to leave the land. But then there's a much more upbeat scene, which I'd like to take a look at. And this is now when the land becomes a strip mall, and there's a Piggly Wiggly supermarket there, and it's inside this supermarket. And let's take a look.
Okay.
So tell me, in this scene, what's going on?
Well, this is actually the first transformation into the supermarket, and we were sort of playing with these kind of drastic shifts in the piece, where in one moment we might be in kind of the more quiet or serene scene at the table, but then really juxtapose that against a totally another feel. And in this moment, I think we were really kind of playing with, in some instances, how fun it can be to be a consumer. We looked at a lot of commercials. I think we were inspired by some of the people in the company, their musical theater background. We all have really different backgrounds.
Now, is that you up there dancing?
Actually, no. That is the redhead is my sister.
Is that right?
She was in the piece, and actually my brother Shane Meador designed the set.
No, that's tremendous.
So,
a real family affair.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrific. All right, well, I don't want to give away the store or the plot of land or whatever, but what has become of this plot of land?
Well, most recently, the plot of land, a church has moved in to this strip mall. And the old Piggly Wiggly is now the church. And I really got interested in the church because, well, one, it's just kind of odd, this supermarket turning into a church, but also that the church, in a time where so much is being torn down, and resources are becoming more limited, that they chose to reimagine what that space could be. And it's that reimagining that I also think the role of the artist and how we might help people to think about, or have the tools to help people think about how to reimagine these spaces that are being abandoned.
Now, this premiered at the Kennedy Center in Washington on the Millennium Stage. It's showing again in June 2009 at Dance Place in Washington. Has it gone to Augusta, Georgia yet?
It has not gone to Augusta, Georgia yet. We carry a bit of Augusta, Georgia with us each place that we do the piece. I do hope that it travels to Augusta, Georgia someday, but I also feel like the piece wasn't just made for that community, that the questions that we're asking are larger questions about what we leave behind, what we hope to build for the future. And the piece actually ended up being a lot more about food than I imagined it would be, because I got really interested in this transformation from actually the farm to the supermarket and looking at where our food comes from and the nature of how that's shifted over time.
And so what's coming up next for you, Cassie Meador?
Well, I hope that this work continues to develop. We're beginning to develop some of the educational components around it, where we might not only go into a community and perform the piece, but get to ask new communities some of these same questions about their own histories. This particular project, Drift, about land use, has also led to some other environmental projects. I just finished co-teaching a course at Wesleyan University on tropical ecology, where 10 days of the course were a field course in Guyana, South America. And the students were charged with looking at the effects of global warming on these particular ecosystems, and then the role of the artist, me and another company member from Dance Exchange, Matt Mahaney, was to help them to develop tools and to look at how to bring that information back to the public.
Well, many thanks to Cassie Meador for joining us to talk about the story behind the dance Drift and its performance. Want to learn more or see it? Well, contact Cassie at the Dance Exchange at danceexchange.org. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been In Step.
I thought that I'd blow it or say something wrong. I felt so self-conscious, like I don't belong. I wanted you to know me without saying a word, but it took some unfolding for my heart to be heard, and I tried to be perfect. I tried being cool. I'll try being human. That's all right with you. Just like Jacob's ladder, it travels up my spine. I could tell you it matters without a reason or rhyme, and I feel so exposed, both inside and out. It's in the unknowing, It's in the shadow of doubt, and I try to be perfect. I've tried being cool. I'll try being human, if that's all right with you. Yeah. I thought sure that I'd blow it or do something wrong. I felt so self-conscious, man, I just don't belong. And I tried to be perfect, I tried being cool. I'll try being human, if that's all right with you. Yeah, yeah.
I'd like to welcome you, Billy Coulter, to the Coffee House.
Thank you.
And Tom Dare, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Now, I think I've seen you guys before, but there were more of you. It
Yes.
was larger.
We're actually half of a four-piece band.
And now this is obviously the acoustic Coulter.
This is the
Maybe
quieter
that could be
version.
it.
That's
Acoustic Coulter.
Acoustic Coulter, yeah.
I don't know. We'd probably get calls from people. Songs that you do are in a set, mostly all originals?
Mostly. There's a few covers that we like that we've pulled out from our childhood, usually.
Right. So childhood then, when you'd be listening to radio, we're talking 70s?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah?
Something like that.
Not 60s, no. Okay. How much does that influence your songwriting?
Pretty much. I mean, there's no denying that that Dylan, the Beatles, and the Stones were all sort of ingrained in my psyche. So.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yeah,
that's a good
I
thing.
like
I notice that your audiences, from the places I've seen you, it's a pretty mixed age, which I think is very good. You're hitting the 20-somethings as well as the whatever else is out there.
Yeah.
How much work do you do as a duo versus the full group?
Well, Tommy and I play probably a couple times a month as the duo, or sometimes a trio, like we do at Austin Grill, and then the band plays once or twice a month. So it's split that
Do you
way.
have a preference for which you like doing?
Well, I think we like to just grab those electric guitars and have
Crank
a
it up.
blast. Yeah.
But then again, there's work for the more acoustic setting.
Absolutely. It's
What
nice.
was the name of the song you opened with?
That was called Being Human.
Okay, and that was written about probably somebody.
About somebody who looks a lot like me.
It's somebody maybe even on the stage. Why don't you take us out with one? What are you going to do?
I think we'll play a song called Conscience.
Okay.
If that's all right with Tommy.
It could affect your conscience.
All right.
Okay, thank
Thanks,
you.
David.
Take us home.
Thanks. Well, conscience, oh conscience, don't you let me be. Can't have much fun if y'all watching me. Got a devil on my left side, an angel on my right. Who knows what kind of trouble we could find tonight, yeah. Well, conscience, oh conscience, I've been dealing so fair. If you weren't looking been hanging around, my life has gotten so bored. Feeling like I might have my virginity restored. Yeah, time and time again I see that karma coming round. All these guilty pleasures sure to bring me down, sure to bring me down. Well, conscience, oh conscience, you left me in despair. I black out the memories that I find in there. Always being tempted, I guess there's just no cure. Forever look for mischief, just like I did before, oh yeah. Well, conscience, oh conscience, won't you let me be? I can't have much fun if y'all watching me. I can't have much fun if y'all watching me. I can't have much fun if y'all watching me.